What if I told you that every single thought you've ever had has literally rearranged the atoms of the universe around you? What if the ancient mystics weren't speaking in metaphors when they claimed that mind shapes matter, but were actually describing the most fundamental law of existence itself? Welcome, soul traveler, to the Eternal Library. Tonight, we dive into the intersection where quantum physics meets ancient wisdom, where the laboratory meets the monastery, and where your consciousness becomes the ultimate creative force in reality. But be warned, soul traveler, once you understand this truth, you can never unknow it, and the responsibility that comes with this knowledge has driven some to enlightenment, and others to madness. Welcome back to the Eternal Library, where tonight we unlock the secret that connects Tibetan dream yogis to Nobel Prize winning physicists, Sufi mystics to quantum mechanics researchers, and your very thoughts to the fabric of space and time itself. For over 4,000 years, from the banks of the Ganges where Hindu sages first proclaimed Tat Tvam Asi, thou art that, to the quantum laboratories of Princeton and Stanford, humanity has been circling around a single, staggering revelation, that consciousness doesn't just observe reality, it creates it, moment by moment, thought by thought, with each subtle shift in awareness literally restructuring the molecular dance of existence around us, and what modern science is only now beginning to prove. The ancients encoded in their most sacred texts, their deepest meditations, and their most guarded initiatory practices. The Rig Veda, composed over 3 millennia ago, declared Sarvam Kalvidam Brahma, all this is indeed Brahman, consciousness itself, while the Upanishads whispered that the observer and the observed are one seamless reality, that the knower and the known collapse into a single field of pure awareness. But these weren't philosophical abstractions. These were precise descriptions of how reality actually functions at its most fundamental level. In ancient Egypt, the Hermetic axiom as above, so below, as within, so without wasn't mystical poetry but a scientific formula describing how the microcosm of consciousness reflects and reshapes the macrocosm of material existence, while the Egyptian priests in the temples of Heliopolis practiced what they called Heka, the power of thought forms to manifest physical changes, literally believing that spoken words and mental images could alter the course of the Nile, heal diseases, and transform base metals into gold through focused intention combined with precise ritual action. The Kabbalistic tradition speaks of the 10 Sphirot as emanations of divine consciousness that structure all reality, with human thought and intention serving as conduits for these cosmic forces, while the Zohar explicitly states that thought is the beginning of all existence and describes how focused meditation can literally rearrange the spiritual architectures that underlie physical manifestation. But here's where it gets truly mind-bending, because these ancient teachings align perfectly with what quantum physicists discovered in the early 20th century when they began probing the fundamental nature of matter and energy. When Max Planck first proposed that energy comes in discrete packets called quanta in 1900, he inadvertently opened a doorway into a realm where consciousness and matter interweave in ways that would have been familiar to any Tibetan Lama or Vedantic sage, because at the quantum level, the very act of observation changes what is being observed. Particles exist in multiple states simultaneously until consciousness collapses the wave function into a single reality, and the boundary between subject and object, observer and observed, dissolves into what physicist John Wheeler called a participatory universe where consciousness is not separate from the cosmos but is the very fabric from which the cosmos weaves itself. The double-slit experiment, first performed by Thomas Young in 1801 and refined countless times since, demonstrates that photons and electrons behave as waves of probability until the moment they are observed, at which point they collapse into definite particles with specific locations. But here's the truly staggering part that most people miss: it's not the measuring device that causes this collapse. It's the consciousness behind the measurement, the awareness that chooses to look, that literally forces reality to choose a single outcome from infinite possibilities. Werner Heisenberg, one of the founding fathers of quantum mechanics, wrote, "What we observe is not nature itself, but nature exposed to our method of questioning, essentially confirming what the ancient Advaita Vedanta tradition had taught for millennia, that reality is a co-creation between consciousness and its object of attention, that the questioner shapes the answer, that the seeker determines what is found. But this goes far beyond laboratory experiments, because if consciousness shapes reality at the quantum level, and if quantum effects scale up to influence larger systems through what scientists call quantum coherence and macroscopic quantum phenomena, then every thought, every emotion, every subtle shift in awareness is literally participating in the ongoing creation of your personal reality field. The mystics of medieval Islam, particularly the Sufi poet Ibn Arabi, described this as creative imagination or khayal, explaining how the divine consciousness dreams the world into existence moment by moment, and how human consciousness, as a reflection of divine consciousness, participates in this ongoing creation through the power of focused intention and purified awareness. He wrote, "Wheresoever you turn, there is the face of Allah," meaning that consciousness encounters itself. That mind can influence matter at a distance through mechanisms that classical physics cannot explain. But quantum field theory provides the missing link, suggesting that consciousness operates through what David Bohm called the implicate order, a deeper level of reality where all possibilities exist in potential form until consciousness selects which possibilities to actualize through the act of observation and intention. The Tibetan Buddhist tradition speaks of this as Rigpa, pure awareness that recognizes its own nature as the ground of all experience, while describing advanced practitioners who could manifest physical phenomena through the power of concentrated mind, not through supernatural intervention but through understanding and working with the fundamental laws of consciousness-matter interaction that govern all reality. The Tibetan Book of the Dead describes the bardas, intermediate states, between death and rebirth, as realms where consciousness shapes experience directly without the medium of a physical body, essentially describing what quantum physicists now call consciousness-mediated reality, where observation determines outcome, where expectation influences probability, where belief becomes the architect of experience. But here's where the ancient warnings become crucial, because just as nuclear physics revealed that splitting atoms could either power cities or destroy them, understanding that consciousness shapes reality comes with profound responsibility. The Hindu tradition speaks of Maya not as illusion but as the creative power of consciousness to project realities, warning that unconscious use of this power creates endless suffering through identification with temporary forms, while conscious mastery of this power leads to liberation through recognition of one's true nature as pure awareness itself. The Hermetic alchemists understood this deeply, encoding their knowledge in symbols and metaphors precisely because they knew that unearned or misused knowledge of consciousness-reality interaction could lead to spiritual inflation, psychosis, or what they called nigredo, the dark night of the soul, where the ego mind tries to use spiritual power for material gain and ends up destroying itself in the process. This is why the ancient mystery schools required years of purification, ethical training, and psychological preparation before revealing the deeper teachings about the creative power of consciousness. Modern neuroscience is now discovering that meditation literally rewires the brain, that focused attention creates new neural pathways, that visualization activates the same brain regions as actual experience, providing the biological mechanism through which consciousness can influence both internal states and external circumstances. Researchers at Harvard Medical School found that 8 weeks of mindfulness meditation increased cortical thickness in areas associated with attention and sensory processing, while decreasing activity in the amygdala, essentially showing that consciousness can physically reshape its own neural substrate through focused practice. The implications are staggering, because if your thoughts are constantly shaping your brain, and if your brain influences your perception of reality, and if your perception of reality influences your choices and behaviors, and if your choices and behaviors influence your environment and relationships, then you are literally thinking your world into existence moment by moment through an endless feedback loop between consciousness, neurology, psychology, and physical manifestation. But this process usually happens unconsciously, which is why most people feel like victims of circumstances rather than creators of their reality. The ancient yogic tradition mapped this process precisely, describing how vritis or thought forms create samskaras or mental impressions that become vasanas or subconscious tendencies that manifest as karma or life circumstances, essentially providing a complete model of how consciousness creates reality through the mechanism of habitual mental patterns. Patanjali's Yoga Sutras state Yogachitvritti Nirodha Yoga is the cessation of fluctuations in consciousness, not to stop thinking but to become aware of how thinking shapes experience so that one can consciously participate in reality creation rather than being unconsciously driven by conditioned patterns. The Sufi mystic Rumi wrote, "You are not a drop in the ocean, you are the entire ocean in a drop," pointing to the recognition that individual consciousness is not separate from cosmic consciousness but is a focal point through which universal creativity expresses itself, which means that when you change your consciousness, you don't just change your personal reality, you participate in changing the entire universe because consciousness is indivisible. Every shift in awareness ripples through the quantum field, influencing probability patterns, synchronicity networks, and what Carl Jung called the collective unconscious that connects all minds in a vast web of shared meaning and mutual influence. Quantum entanglement, the phenomenon where particles remain connected regardless of distance, provides a physical model for what mystics have always claimed, that separation is an illusion, that all consciousness is interconnected, that changing yourself changes everything because there's only one consciousness appearing as many through the creative power of divine imagination. When Einstein called entanglement spooky action at a distance, he was unknowingly describing what shamans call non-local healing, what Hindu sages call telepathy, and what quantum physicists now call non-local correlation, the fact that consciousness can influence reality instantaneously across any distance because consciousness itself is non-local, existing everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. The practical implications of this understanding are revolutionary because once you realize that your thoughts are not private internal events but creative forces that shape the probability fields around you, you naturally become more conscious of what you think, more intentional about where you focus your attention, more responsible for the mental and emotional atmospheres you generate. The ancient practice of smriti or mindfulness becomes not just a personal development technique but a cosmic responsibility, a way of consciously participating in the ongoing creation of reality rather than unconsciously polluting the collective field with negative thoughts and emotions. But here's where most people get trapped in spiritual materialism, trying to use this knowledge to manifest personal desires while missing the deeper teaching. The ancient masters weren't interested in using consciousness to get what they wanted but in discovering what consciousness itself is beyond all wanting, not in manipulating reality but in recognizing their true identity as reality, not in changing circumstances but in awakening to the changeless awareness that remains constant through all circumstances. This is why the Buddha taught that attachment to outcomes causes suffering even when you get what you want, why the Tao Te Ching counsels wu wei or effortless action that aligns with natural flow rather than forcing personal will, why the Bhagavad Gita advocates performing action without attachment to results. The Jewish mystical tradition of Kabbalah describes this as Tikkun Olam, repairing the world, but explains that the world is repaired not through external action alone but through the elevation of consciousness that sees divine sparks hidden within every experience, even apparently negative ones. The Zohar teaches that consciousness can literally rescue fragments of divine light that have become trapped in material forms, but this rescue happens through recognition, through seeing the sacred within the mundane, through loving awareness that dissolves the illusion of separation between spirit and matter, consciousness and reality. Modern physics is approaching this same understanding through the study of consciousness as a fundamental field rather than an emergent property of brain activity. Researchers like Stuart Hameroff and Roger Penrose propose that consciousness operates through quantum processes and microtubules within neurons, while physicists like Amit Goswami suggest that consciousness is the ground of being from which material reality emerges, not the other way around. These theories align perfectly with what the Advaita Vedanta tradition has always taught, that consciousness is the fundamental reality and everything else is appearance within consciousness, like waves in the ocean of awareness. The practical path forward involves what the ancient traditions call sadhana, spiritual practice that systematically purifies consciousness so it can recognize its own creative power and use it wisely. This begins with basic mindfulness, learning to observe thoughts without identifying with them, recognizing that you are the awareness that observes thoughts rather than being the thoughts themselves. As this recognition deepens, you naturally become more conscious of how different thoughts create different feeling states, how different feeling states attract different experiences, how different experiences reinforce different beliefs in an endless cycle of consciousness. Creating reality, creating consciousness. The breath becomes a bridge between consciousness and body, between intention and manifestation, because breath carries awareness into the nervous system where it can influence brainwaves, hormone production, neurotransmitter balance, and ultimately the quantum field interactions that determine how consciousness interfaces with material reality. Ancient pranayama techniques like nadi shodhana breathing literally balanced the electromagnetic fields of the body while creating coherent brainwave patterns that enhance the mind's ability to influence probability through focused intention. Visualization practices work because the brain cannot distinguish between vividly imagined experiences and actual experiences at the neurological level, which means that detailed mental rehearsal creates the same neural pathways as physical practice while also programming the subconscious mind with new patterns that manifest as changed circumstances. But the key insight from the mystical traditions is that visualization works best when it's done from a state of already feeling fulfilled, rather than from a state of lack trying to get something, because the quantum field responds to the vibrational frequency of consciousness, not to the specific content of thoughts. The Hindu concept of bhava or emotional state explains why two people can practice identical techniques with completely different results. It's not the technique itself, but the quality of consciousness behind the technique that determines its effectiveness. When you visualize from love, gratitude, and expansive awareness, you create coherent energy patterns that align with natural harmony and tend to manifest beneficial outcomes. But when you visualize from fear, neediness, or contracted awareness, you create chaotic energy patterns that interfere with natural flow and often manifest the opposite of what you consciously intend. The Sufi practice of dhikr or remembrance involves repetitive prayers and movements designed to align individual consciousness with divine consciousness, not through mental effort but through surrender of personal will to cosmic will. This creates what quantum physicists call coherent states where individual awareness synchronizes with larger patterns of cosmic intelligence, enabling what appears to be miraculous manifestation but is actually natural while operating through harmonized consciousness that doesn't conflict with the deeper currents of universal unfoldment. Tibetan dream yoga provides perhaps the clearest model for understanding how consciousness shapes reality because in the dream state, the normal rules of physical causation are suspended and consciousness creates experience directly through imagination, belief, and emotional resonance. Advanced practitioners learn to become lucid within dreams and then practice manifesting different dream scenarios through pure intention, developing the skill of conscious reality creation that can then be applied in waking life through understanding that waking reality operates by similar principles but with more apparent density and slower response times. The crucial insight from all traditions is that consciousness shapes reality most effectively when it operates from what mystics call the natural state, pure awareness that is completely relaxed, totally present, and free from the effort of trying to get or avoid anything. This is why the most powerful manifesting often happens during deep meditation, prayer, or other states where the personal self dissolves into expanded awareness that includes everything it previously felt separate from. Because separation itself is the root illusion that blocks the natural creative power of consciousness. Modern research on placebo effects provides remarkable validation of consciousness-reality interaction because placebos work through belief alone, literally causing measurable physiological changes through the power of expectation. Studies show that placebo surgeries can be as effective as actual surgeries for certain conditions. That placebo antidepressants can create the same neurochemical changes as actual antidepressants. That placebo pain medication can trigger the release of natural opioids in the brain, proving that belief itself is a powerful medicine that works through consciousness, directly influencing biological systems. The mechanism appears to involve what researchers call top-down processing, where higher-order cognitive functions influence lower-level biological processes through the nervous system's complex feedback loops. But quantum biology suggests that consciousness might also influence cellular function through quantum field effects that bypass classical neural pathways entirely. This would explain phenomena like spontaneous remission, psychic healing, and other cases where consciousness appears to directly restructure physical matter without going through normal biological intermediates. The ancient Egyptian practice of Heka combined spoken words, mental visualization, and physical gestures to focus consciousness in ways that could allegedly heal diseases, influence weather patterns, and transform matter. While mainstream science dismisses such claims, quantum field theory provides plausible mechanisms through which focused consciousness could influence probability patterns in complex systems, essentially making what appears magical into advanced application of natural law that operates through consciousness-matter interaction at quantum scales. The Kabbalistic tree of life provides a detailed map of how consciousness manifests reality through different levels of emanation, from pure undifferentiated awareness at the top to dense physical matter at the bottom, with human consciousness serving as the crucial bridge between spiritual and material realms. Each of the 10 sphera represents different qualities of consciousness that can be developed through specific practices, enabling practitioners to consciously participate in the ongoing creation of reality through alignment with cosmic principles rather than through ego-driven manipulation of circumstances. What emerges from this synthesis of ancient wisdom and modern science is a radically different understanding of human nature and potential. You are not a separate individual trying to survive in an indifferent universe, but a focal point of cosmic consciousness that is literally dreaming reality into existence moment by moment through the power of attention, intention, and awareness. Every thought contributes to the collective dream. Every emotion ripples through the quantum field. Every moment of presence participates in the ongoing creation of what mystics call the eternal now, where all possibilities exist simultaneously until consciousness chooses which possibility to experience through the act of focused attention. This understanding naturally leads to what spiritual traditions call ethical living, not because of external rules, but because once you recognize that your thoughts affect everyone and everything through the interconnected field of consciousness, you naturally want your mental contributions to be beneficial rather than harmful. The ancient concept of ahimsa or nonviolence expands to include nonviolence in thought and emotion because negative mental states create disharmony in the collective field that eventually manifests as conflict and suffering in the physical world. The practice becomes a delicate balance between accepting what is while simultaneously holding space for what could be, recognizing that resistance to present circumstances actually reinforces them through the quantum principle that attention energizes whatever it focuses on. This is why mystical traditions emphasize equanimity, the ability to remain centered and loving regardless of external conditions, because equanimity allows consciousness to respond to situations from wisdom rather than react from conditioning, creating space for new possibilities to emerge naturally rather than forcing change through willpower alone. As you deepen in this understanding, you begin to recognize that the ultimate purpose of consciousness-reality interaction is not personal manifestation but cosmic awakening. The universe is literally waking up to its own nature through individual focal points of awareness, and your role as a conscious being is to facilitate this awakening process by becoming increasingly transparent to the light of pure awareness that seeks to know itself through infinite expressions of creativity and love. The great secret that quantum physics and mystical traditions both point toward is that consciousness is not produced by the brain but is the fundamental field from which brains and everything else emerge. You are not a temporary biological organism having occasional spiritual experiences, but an eternal expression of cosmic consciousness having a temporary human experience. And recognizing this truth transforms everything, because once you know what you really are, the question shifts from, how can I use my thoughts to change reality, to how can I align my individual consciousness with cosmic consciousness so that reality changes naturally through divine will expressing itself through purified awareness. The ancient promise holds true: as above, so below; as within, so without. As consciousness transforms, reality transforms, not through force but through grace, not through manipulation but through revelation, not through getting what you want but through becoming what you are. The path forward is both simple and profound. Begin where you are, with the thoughts you're thinking right now, recognizing that each thought is a prayer, each feeling is a broadcast, each moment of attention is a vote for the kind of reality you want to experience and create. Start with gratitude for the mystery of existence itself. Cultivate love for the interconnected web of life that you are part of. And trust that as your consciousness aligns with truth and beauty and goodness, reality naturally reflects that alignment back to you in ways that serve the highest good of all beings everywhere. If this journey into the quantum nature of consciousness has illuminated something within your soul, share this ancient wisdom with fellow seekers who are ready to understand their true creative power, and let us know in the comments what aspect of consciousness reality interaction most calls to your spirit, for the path of awakening is walked together, and each moment of recognition strengthens the collective field of awakening consciousness that is transforming our world from the inside out. Thank you, soul traveler, for joining this exploration into the deepest mystery of existence itself, where science and spirituality converge in the recognition that consciousness is the Alpha and Omega, the first cause and final purpose, the eternal dreamer awakening to its own infinite creative nature through you.